All right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second workshop in the Prescribed Burning Workshop series. Tonight, we will be talking about burn plans, smoke management plans, and some of the permitting processes. All right, so again, I'll do a quick introduction, then we'll just turn it right over to our presenters. As always, if you could please keep your microphone and camera off during the workshop, it will help with the bandwidth in the streaming and reduce distractions. For questions, please post them in the chat box, and we will respond to them during the Q&A. Again, this workshop is being recorded, and I will make it available online through the link I already sent everyone to view at a later time. So today we'll be talking about plans and permits, and I just want to say that last week we talked about the fundamentals. We had a really the kind of introduction to prescribed fire, and I thought it was a really great workshop. We had this really neat kind of progression and ideas where we started with Norm talking about the fundamentals, like the real technical aspects of what do you actually have to think about when you want to use prescribed fire, and then Kyle talked about how, you know, if we want to increase the scale and capacity and expand our use of prescribed fire, it's going to really take community and collaboration and communication. And so that's a fundamental part of this process, and something the PBA, is the Prescribed Burn Association, is really trying to help facilitate. And then Sasha finished up by really diving into the fire ecology, the ecological reasons, and why we might want to use prescribed fire. So now we're thinking about our goals and objectives and why we're interested in using fire, and how we're going to take those things that we learned and that we know and that we're interested in achieving. And we're going to start the process of actually getting fire implemented and using good fire again. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Norm. I'm going to stop my screen share, and he's going to have a presentation, and we'll go on. So Norm, whenever you're ready, feel free.
Hey, Mike, thanks. Hello, everybody. Let me get my little screen share thing up here. Bear with me. There's one of them right there. Get this thing up and running. Okay. I looked this thing over just a little bit. We can get very technical and very complex when it comes to burn plans. When I was working and we were putting together VMPs, our burn plans were hundreds of pages long, took a whole binder. Because of the California Environmental Quality Act and a government agency, we had to abide by all CEQA, archaeological reviews, natural diversity database reviews, and whatnot. So it was very complex and very slow going. However, for us, I think we need to really keep it as simple as we can, and that's going to depend on the burn itself and the comfort of the folks putting on the burn. So the first part, we're going to really just kind of talk about the burn plan itself and the basic elements. This is just an introduction to it. This isn't anything technical on how to write the burn plan, but it's just going to cover the top elements of putting together a burn plan. As I said, can be simple, should be simple for what we're doing. We want to cover all our bases, but it can be as simple as writing it down on the hood of a vehicle the day of the burn you're going to do, depending on the complexity of it. Your goals, you want to state your goals on your burn plan. How are you going to do this, conduct this burn? We're going to get into these, but these are just some of the basic stuff. You always want to put safety out there as one of the primary elements of your burn. We don't need to get anybody hurt out doing these projects. And also talk about post-burn. What are you going to do after the burn? There's a number of different plans out there. You can Google it. You can find burn plans. CAL FIRE has a document they use. BLM has one, and the National Wildfire Coordinating Group has one. And that's what I kind of modeling off of. It's pretty much nationwide. A lot of folks know all about it. So there's 19 elements that need to be covered in this burn plan. And this is a complex burn plan. And I'm not saying we need to do this for every burn. I just wanted to throw this out there that you can do part of these burn plans or the entire thing. It just depends on how complex we want to get. And again, I want to stress keeping it simple if we can. Okay, so the first element of the burn plan will be basically who the players are. This is local, local private property folks. It's not agencies putting this on. So basically, who's in charge of this is going to be the landowner. And it'll say who any agencies that are involved, CAL FIRE, local agencies, air quality management districts, et cetera. So that's a simple one-page part of this burn plan. Okay, so authorization. Before you conduct your burn and you want to review your plan after it's written, and you want to make sure, has anything changed in the plan? Have lines changed, the locational lines changed? Is the time of year, the fuel conditions changed? You want to consider all these factors before signing and putting off on your burn plan, if it's going to be one of these complex ones. Has all pre-burn work been done? Have all the lines been put in? Has any jackpots of fuel been taken care of along the side of your line? Can everything be met? Notifications. Notifications are one of the big keys in this, and you'll probably hear me talk about it quite a bit. And notifications and communication. One of the biggest notifications that you can make is opening up lines of communication with your adjoining neighbors. In today's atmosphere with the recent fires, people see smoke, smell smoke, whatever, the anxiety level is very high. So if we can open up the communication with our neighbors, kind of what Kyle talked last week, if you were on this, and even get them involved. But if you can open up those lines of communications, it'll be dividends later. It's really, really important. So the third element is basically a go, no-go checklist. So after your burn plan has been put together, you want to think about, again, and some of this stuff will be talked about a few times, but can have conditions changed? If there's been any conditions, you need to address those. Any change needed? Do we need to beef up the lines? Do we need to maybe go a little smaller because of the weather patterns? Do we have all permits in place? And by permits, I mean the CAL FIRE permits if needed, the air quality burn permits, notifications. Have you met all the notifications? And again, your neighbors, your adjoining property owners, any fire districts, and in a complex burn, we're probably going to have them helping us out with it anyway. So they're going to be notified. And then media, we may want to get a media notification going and discuss that. But before you do your burn, you want to make sure you check off any notifications. Weather forecast is another key. Monitor the weather forecasts for a week or two before your burn. There are ways of doing spot weather forecasts, but that's something we can get into later. But really look over your forecast for the day of the burn. What are the winds doing? What's the temperatures, et cetera? Make sure that you're in prescription on your weather, and which puts us right to prescription. Is the prescription met? In the burn plan, there'll be specifics in there as far as temperature, wind velocities, relative humidity. If we have the ability to do it, would be dry fuel moistures and live fuel moistures could be part of that. But we make sure our prescriptions have been met. And I highly recommend when we conduct these burns, if we have a written down prescription and we start pushing the edge of that, and I'll use just a little example. If we call for 90 degrees as the top end of our temperature and we start hitting 95 degrees, we might want to potentially look at changing things up, maybe stopping our burn if we can safely do that. But that's just something to be thinking about. Is your smoke management plan in place? Are you in compliance with the smoke management plan and communication with air quality to make sure that they're all good to go with us burning out there? And then finally, do we have all the equipment necessary? If we have put in there on any certain burn that we need fire equipment, dozers, the proper staffing, the number of personnel to actually conduct the burn, do we have everything in place? And if we can say yes to most of these on a complex burn, then by all means, we we move forward. That picture right there doesn't really mean a whole lot other than complexity and how complex do we really want to get. We can get very, very complex on these things, or as I've said, we can do one where we go out and do a quick little pencil in things on a pickup, and we have a couple people who's in charge, a burn boss, a couple burners, maybe somebody to keep an eye out, and you're good to go. So what makes a burn complex? There are some forms we can use that is a complexity rating. CAL FIRE uses one now. When I assisted BLM years ago, we would do this long drawn out complexity rating. But basically, you know, it's how many acres. A 1 to 50 acre burn is probably not that complex as far as acreage goes. But once we start getting over 50, we might need to put the complexity up a little bit. Where's the burn located? Are you out in the middle of lands? Or is this going to be like on the west side of Ukiah where you've got 15,000 or more people that are looking right up on the hillside? What kind of terrain or topography are we talking about when we're conducting the burns? Is the terrain one drainage and one slope, or are we putting in multiple drainages, multiple slopes, multiple fuel types? How many people are involved? Again, we can go out with, I've done it many times just by myself and a drip torch, or we might have 3, 4 people, or as a burn we did down in the Cooley Ranch, there was probably 50 plus people, and that makes it a little more complex, more people running around. The number of agencies. We can have one as simple as, I'm just using this example, CAL FIRE and Ukiah Fire Authority assisting, along with Mendocino Air Quality. That's not too bad, but we also might want to use one of these to do a training component, and we might have half a dozen fire agencies involved and do these as a training component also. What's the experience level of the folks putting on the burn? If we have folks that have not done too many burns, they don't have that much experience, and the only way you can get the experience is to get out there and actually put fire on the ground, observe the fire behavior. So if you don't have much experience, it might make it a little more complex. And next to last down there is exposure to infrastructure. Again, if you're down there in Ukiah and very visible, and I'll give you a quick little, real quick story, but years ago we did a burn east of Ukiah up there off of Cow Mountain on private property, and up on top of the hill is a set of repeaters for one thing is a TV repeater for Ukiah. And we accidentally burnt some cables and put the TV out in Ukiah. So you want to make sure you mitigate any of those types of things. It's not fun when you hear it from the director of the department. So, and then time of year and the fuel types. If you're burning in July, things become a little more complex with the type of fuel you're burning and the need for more fire control equipment with more people, et cetera. Or are you going to burn in December, pile burning, or as I did back in just before these rains, you do a quick little burn in the brush and you do it with a couple people. So time of year and fuel types make a big difference also. And then area 5 of the burn plan is a description of the fire area, okay? And that'll be accompanied with maps, but it's basically a physical description of the area that's you can put in as a summary. Just explaining the topography of the area, the vegetation type, and the fuel type. So the picture up there is actually the little burn we did in, I think it was January 11th is when we did this burn. West facing, this ridge line coming down, if you can see my pointer, is a west facing slope. South facing slope where the fire is for the most part, a little ridge comes down there. And these fuel types in this brush, this chamise, this North Coast chaparral hasn't burned in, well, since I've been up there, so over 30 years, that had not burned in there. So that's just, and we conducted that particular burn without any type of control lines or anything on this particular day. And that's based on the fuel type and the time of year and the conditions. Okay, next element needs to be written in there is what are the goals of your burn? What are the resource goals? Are you just putting fire in the ground to add it back into the ecosystem? Or are you looking at trying to hit the star thistle or other invasive species? You're trying to knock the fir trees back. Is it a habitat improvement? Is it purely fuel reduction? Those are all need to be stated in the burn plan. And kind of prescribed fire goals kind of is part of that, but also what do we get out of it? And it's the experience and the training that's really one of the key components. And as I stated earlier, if you don't get out and do these burns, you just don't see it. We can sit here virtually and look at pictures and videos, but until folks get out and really experience, that's the best way to get this knowledge. Okay, element 7 on our burn plan. There'll be a prescription, basically the parameters. There'll be a prescription on your fuel moistures. If we have the ability, and I don't have it right now, but I'm sure we could come up with it some way, but of taking dry fuel and live fuel moistures, that will give us a good idea of the condition of the fuels. In your parameter, you're going to have an air temperature. I talked about earlier. It might be 85 degrees, it might be 90, it might be 60 degrees, depending on what you want to accomplish. Minimum relative humidities might be hovering around 25. Anything below 25, anything below 20 or 25, you start throwing a little red flags up, little caution flags. It starts getting pretty dry. Wind velocity. Me personally, in my experience, if you get a nice little breeze of 3 to 7, that's optimal. Up to 10 miles an hour is really good. If depending on the conditions, control lines, how you're burning, you can burn, if you are getting gusts up to 20, but the minute you start getting over 10 miles an hour, you want to start having those caution flags up and be thinking about what you're doing. I threw in there, just for the sake of it, Behave. And that is a computer modeling app that's used to forecast fire behavior, and it'll give you an idea of what type of fire behavior you may experience by putting in the inputs such as the weather, the humidities, the fuel types, the slope, aspect, etc. I don't have that ability right now. I'm sure we can get it also as part of this group, but right now we don't. And then time of year, that's another key component. Are we burning in December, April, or are we burning in July? Makes a big difference. Okay, back to element 8, scheduling. What are your ignition timeframes? And by that, I mean, these need to be written in the plan. Are you gonna start, can you start burning in the morning? By 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, or is it best to wait until 1, 2 in the afternoon? You get the time of the heating of the day. Again, time of the day makes a big difference. This time of year, I don't even really consider burning until about 1 o'clock or so in the afternoon. And our burn window is fairly short. It's probably 12 to 1, depending on the location in the county, to 4 o'clock in the afternoon right now, mainly. How long since the last precipitation? If we're burning in this wintertime burn periods, one of my rules of thumbs that I always try to preach a little bit is 10 days of dry. The burn we did in January, as I said earlier, was only 8 days of dry, but we had almost record temperatures and a northeast wind event, which helped dry fuels out. And then another thing to be thinking about is duration of the burn. Are you going to be able to do this burn in 1 day? Is it complex enough and large enough that it's going to take 2 or 3 days? And then equally as important is how long for the burn down. In other words, you're going to have residual smoke on these. Is it going to be done by the next morning? Or do you have heavier fuels and it's going to be going till it might burn for a week? And then you notice on the weather, there's a wind event, dry northeast winds, then you might have maybe potentially some problems based on the time of the year. Element 9 is pre-burn considerations. Have you put your holding lines in? Do you need holding lines? And again, we can be as simple as burning as I did in January, where we really don't need any lines. You want to identify any staging areas, safety areas, and lookouts for the day of your burn. Monitor the weather. I discussed that earlier. And again, infrastructure concerns on your burn. Do you have power lines going through it? Do you need to do any mitigations? You need to clear around power lines. You need to keep the fire out from around those power lines. Those are all concerns that need to be written into your burn plan. Another big consideration is communications. If we're in an area without cell phones, which can very easily happen here in Mendocino County, do we have the appropriate radio communication? And everybody's been briefed on that. So that's another important one of any considerations. Availability of resources, do you have them all? And again, harp on it a bunch, but notifications, has our media, local agencies, and adjoining property owners, air quality, et cetera, been notified. Very important. And one plan that I haven't gotten into here, but I want to talk about it just real quick, is a IAP, or an incident action plan. And that's developed specifically for the day of the burn or the duration of the project. It's going to spell out who's in charge, who the players are, who's on the firing teams, who's on the holding teams. It's going to have a weather forecast for that particular day. It'll have communications, safety, throw in with safety, even medical, just in case something does happen. But an IAP is part of the burn plan that needs to be prepared basically for the day of the burn. Oh, element 10. As part of the ICS component, and for those who are not too familiar with the ICS system, it is the incident command system. Almost blew that one for a second. Incident command system, been around for a number of years here, used by fire agencies all over California. And it breaks it down into basically who's in charge, who are the players, who's the burn boss, who's the incident commander, which is basically the property owner, if you will, could be delegated to the burn boss. Need to be identified in the briefings. Also important is the objectives. During the briefing, we want to make sure everybody that's there knows what the objectives are, what the project area is. Good mapping is critical to give to everybody, so they're all on page. They know what the project area is, broken into divisions. They're going to know who they work for, etc. Weather forecast, another key element, and what the forecast is for the afternoons. Again, I've talked about it, and again, these are just things that keep coming up all the time, and that's communications. Are everybody on the same page? Does everybody know what we're doing? And do we have the proper communication with radios and frequencies, et cetera? Another thing in the briefing would be an ignition plan, a holding plan, and a safety and medical. And the ignition plan is going to be a quick synopsis on at least the forecasted plan on how we're going to light this thing, and those things always change. And a holding plan, discuss that, who's going to be in charge of holding. And when it comes to holding, that's usually not the funnest job in the world out there. The lighters, the igniters are usually the ones having all the fun, but they're probably the most important component to it, because when things do go a little bit south, you have folks that are there to take care of any potential slopovers and escapes. And as long as they take care of business, we can continue with the project. And then a good safety plan, and discuss any medical in case we have to get anybody out of there. We have a plan. We know how to notify of any medical emergencies and how to get folks out. And let's just hope those things don't happen. Again, organization and equipment. Who is in control? Personally, I think it's the property owner, but they're going to potentially delegate it to a burn boss. And so they delegate that authority basically to a burn boss. Firing teams, holding teams, medical, somebody potentially signed up as logistics, and that's going to be somebody who can take care of all the waters, take care of any feeding and food, the fuel, the equipment, et cetera. Observation, could have a lookout to make sure everything is going well on the burn, and of course safety. And everybody is a safety person, but You can identify one person as a safety depending on how complex these burns are. And again, this is just a touch on the components, the elements of the burn plan. All this stuff is written in there. And this is, in my opinion, as complex as we need to be if we need to go this far. I hope that doesn't confuse the matter here. Communication, number of different ways we can do it out there. At some point, we hope to have a good radio cache. We'll be working on that as far as the PBA goes, but if folks have their own radios, we need to make sure they're all on the same frequencies and all have communication, can talk. So that's vitally important. So in the element number 12, there needs to be a communication plan written in there, and that's which radio frequencies. For a complex one, we might have a command where you can talk to other fire agencies or even the command center, and since we're in Mendocino County, that would be Howard Forest, CAL FIRE. Tactical frequency was what we would be working on the burn itself. Could even throw in on the plan a medical. If there is a medical issue, we could have frequencies just for medical so we can take care of that problem. And I also think now it's pretty good. We throw out phone numbers. We have the cell coverage out there. People be able to actually call folks and text or whatever and get whatever message they need to be. But communication plan element part of this is really important. All right, safety. All the safety hazards need to be written into the plan. There'll be a separate safety plan or message put in with the IAP for the day of the burn, but any safety hazards should be addressed, whether it's topography, steepness of the hills, the fuel type, driving on very steep, narrow, loose ranch roads. And part of the safety measure is mitigation. Mitigation measures should be put into place in this element here, and everybody should be pretty much briefed on it as to what we're going to do about it. And then in case of an injury, what protocol, who do you notify? What's the process to get somebody, if they are injured, into medical help, whether it's just to cut themselves with a Pulaski and need a Band-Aid, or we actually have to transport somebody to a hospital. That should be spelled out very clearly in the safety component in this plan. Okay, another element is a test burn and ignition plan. Not all burns require a test burn, but it's usually kind of nice to maybe throw that out there. You need to have an area on your project where if it doesn't seem to work, if it's going to burn too much, you need to be able to control it and put it out. And if it looks like it's not going to burn well enough, you need to be able to put out. So logistically, it needs to be in an area where you can potentially have equipment there to put it out. In the test burn ignition plan phase or element, there'll be a detailed plan for ignition, where to start, how the ignition is going to take place, start and stop points, and those are critical in doing these burns, is a starting and stopping point. Trigger points of maybe when to stop firing or start fire, or other teams to start firing need to be identified. And then potentially the firing techniques. And again, these can be in a whole other class, firing techniques themselves. So it will spell out what type of firing techniques, such as strip firing, dot firing, firing from a Terratorch, which goes in the back of a pickup flamethrower. But those are all part of the ignition plan element of your burn plan. And again, holding, detailed summary of the holding plan. The day of the IAP will identify who that is, but the folks on the holding plan need to know exactly what the plan is, where they're to stage, and then when to take action. And that's part of those trigger points. Contingency, I kind of threw that dozer picture in there because those are quite the unique dozer blades out there on those dozers there. But contingency, trigger points. There might be a point identified in there as to if we're getting slop overs or spot fires, that you stop firing, and the holding folks and anybody in a contingency plan will then take action. One trigger point could be, are we out of prescription? And then do we need to take action and maybe stop firing and take action for suppression? You having any holding problems? Again, are we getting frequent spot fires? You start getting spot fires across the line on these things, we need to reevaluate what we're doing. Then another big one is smoke impacts in the contingency. If we start later in the day, the smoke lays down and we start impacting communities, we need to have a plan on how we're going to mitigate that. And 17, wildfire declaration component to there is something that we are not going to do. At least I hope we don't ever have to do it. That plan needs to be summarized by who is going to declare that if it does need to happen. Who to make that call to, which would be, in a nutshell, would be Howard Forest Command Center. And once you declare a wildfire declaration, they will do, there'll be a bunch of equipment coming. It's going to be very embarrassing. You know, hopefully it hasn't escaped the property, but usually it's going to be either imminent or already has by the time you declare, by the time it's time to declare a wildfire. Element 18, smoke management. Kyle's going to discuss that a little later here, but in a nutshell, we need to address in the burn plan under element 18 is the smoke management, what we're going to do. We're going to get ours at the local air quality management district here. And last I checked, we're good for 5 years and the cost was $100. Kyle will go over that in more detail in a little bit, but we need to make sure that we work closely with air quality and keep that good cooperating effort going with our folks there. And then post-burn. What are you going to do once, what are we doing? It needs to be summarized, who we tell when it's complete. How are we going to patrol it? Who's going to patrol it? Is the landowner going to patrol it? It all depends on the complexity, the fuel types. Monitor the weather, as I stated earlier. Big component could be that all of a sudden the weather changes and we've got an east-northeast wind and it's in July. And, you know, we might need to take mitigating measures after that. Another big one, at least in my opinion, is, you know, post-burn, we get everything out of there and we make sure we leave it better than we left it. Make sure we get rid of all the trash, any equipment, any hose, you name it. We don't want to be trashing the environment out there. And then any work that may be needed. Do we need to come in, and if we've been working with dozer lines, do we need to do any erosion control measures with water bars or whatever mitigating measures we need to do, put brush back on it, hay, et cetera. But those things need to be talked about in the post-burn element. That pretty much does that little, that portion there. Again, really, really quick snapshot of what the burn is. Part of, I saw on one thing there was, how do you get started on writing these? And I think one of the best thing, if you've never done any of them, or if you're not sure, is that's what the PBA is for, and that's to ask, seek help. Maybe it doesn't need a big complex 19 element burn plan. And that's where folks with some experience or your comfort level or whatever could be there. But writing the burn plan itself is really a whole nother topic that I think we can potentially do at a later date. But that's the basic nuts and bolts of a burn plan. And that's about what I have there. Anything else, Mike?
No, Norm, that was great. Well, I'll just a couple questions, and then Kyle, you can get your presentation up and running while Norm goes over these. Some of these questions, like there's a question about when do we know we need fire lines or fire breaks or constructing burn units. I think we'll revisit those questions next week when we talk about building burn units or establishing burn units and implementing the burn. There was a question about Behave. Somebody wanted to know how they can access the tool. I provided a link in the chat box to the download for the application, Behave Plus. You can download it for free. I think it's managed. It's a Forest Service tool, so they manage it. I'm not entirely sure. One question for Norm directly for you is who is responsible for the creation of the IAP?
That would be, in my opinion, on burns that we're discussing right now, private landowner burns, would be the responsibility of the landowner to make sure that everything is being followed. Whether they delegate that to their buddy who's maybe a fire department volunteer or an active CAL FIRE or U.S. Forest Service employee, or if we're complex enough and the comfort level was to hire an actual burn boss, then that burn boss should be developing that IAP, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's what I figured you'd say. I wanted to make sure we got that out there, that if you're writing the burn plan and you're taking responsibility for the burn, a lot of this is it's your responsibility to fill out these, to build your burn plan and make sure you have the right information available. But a question just asked, can a burn boss or CAL FIRE do this? If you're working under a burn boss, then yes, the burn boss would be responsible for making sure your burn plan is copacetic and is meeting its requirements. CAL FIRE, I can't imagine, would get involved. The only time CAL FIRE is going to sign off anything is if they're directly in charge of the burn. So I think that would be outside the scope of our burns. All right, Norm, that was fantastic. I learned a lot there. Even with the time I've been working with you guys, that for me was very informative. So we'll come back. I think there's some more discussion, but I'd like to get Kyle going and see what time we have at the end. So Kyle, if you're ready, take it away.
Yep. Can you hear me? I'm not a cat. So I think part of the reason I'm involved is to just keep everybody from being intimidated by Norm. You don't have to have that level of experience to be doing this. And he'd be the first one to tell you that. But to just keep in mind, it's not the blind leading the blind, but I've written 9 of these. So, but I'm not saying anything here. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say anything here that's going to be too off target. And also, this is really only for Mendocino County. We're really lucky with our air quality district people that I've worked with. Warren Massey is the main guy there, and he's like probably the most cheerful bureaucrat I've ever dealt with. He actually helped me save money on permit fees, which you don't expect. But keep in mind, this is just Mendocino County. I'm not sure what it's like in other places. Norm was really talking about what we're planning for up here. And when we're talking about smoke management, we're really talking about down here. The questions that we're going to be filling out on these forms are going to be about our own properties, but really these are things for them to feed into their own models. This is V-smoke. You don't have to know how to use V-smoke, but that's how they're kind of determining if there's any chance, if they look at where your burn is and they think there's any chance that smoke's going to be making it to a hospital or a school, they're going to be doing some modeling, and they're going to be using the information that you give them to figure out if there's going to be inversion problems, is really what it comes down to. Here's actually a picture of an inversion, pretty beautiful picture of an inversion in a prescribed fire here in California. And, an inversion just means that usually as you go up, the air gets colder, as we all know when you go hike a mountain. And in an inversion, the opposite's happening, and so it's keeping stuff low. So we also, I just want to make a quick call out here. A lot of us were here for this fire. We have to keep in mind when we're putting smoke out, we're putting less smoke out than would happen when that fire burned later in the year, hotter, more out of control, larger, burning homes, burning plastics, burning cars. I do think we have to hold strong, especially as hopefully prescribed fire gets bigger and there's more people doing it, there's more acres burning. At some point, we're going to hear more complaints. And that's where kind of staying ahead of it and really keeping to the extent that we can with these regulations. the air quality district is who is going to have to deal with the complaints, and the more we can do a good job planning, and the more we can put those plans forward, it helps them deal with the complaints. But let's also remember how beautiful prescribed fire can be. I'm at this picture, a couple of my dogs, and I'm literally in the path of the flaming front. I'm actually just going to kind of move through the smoke management plan that Mendocino County would have you fill out, and just kind of skip everything that's really obvious, and the things that might kind of get you a little nervous and think that you need to really talk to some sort of brilliant expert, which is known as somebody who's 50 miles from home carrying a briefcase. It just kind of help you just buzz through this thing real fast, because you could probably fill out this smoke management plan by the time I'm done with this presentation. So important thing to remember, the reason you need a smoke management plan is because you're burning more than 10 acres broadcast or more than 50 tons of piled fuels. If you're under 10 acres, you do not need this smoke management plan. And so if the smoke management plan is going to keep you from getting started and doing a little burn and just kind of seeing what it's like on your property, don't have this be the limiting factor. Another thing that might seem overwhelming is the purpose of open burning. You can't overthink this thing. I wouldn't put too many things. I think most of mine just say range improvement, carburet stabilization, because I want to point that out to the world. I wouldn't even bother with that, other than that I kind of like pointing out that even though we're releasing carbon, we're also stabilizing a lot of carbon. So I like to remind air quality of that. And then home community protection is a big reason. You could also throw out avoidance of summertime air pollution, but that'd be even a little more snarky. This is, I don't remember if Norm told me this or who told me this, but someone I talked to at some point in the last 10 years mentioned that they put wildlife improvement, and then were requested to have a letter put together by a biologist describing what they were doing there. So I just don't put wildlife improvement. It's a secondary benefit or a primary benefit, but I just don't. I've chosen not to open up that possible window. Another thing that could get a little intimidating if trying to figure out if you're using a topographical approach to your burn unit, like I mentioned last time. The broadcast area might be a little bit intimidating. So that's where, hopefully this won't take me too long. Just wanted to show you guys what I do. This is actually probably more than you would even need to do, but this is how I do it, and they really like my maps. So this is one of my burn units, and real quick, let's see, we are just going to, hopefully this will work, but there's another unit I've been thinking about. Where are we? That is a really easy one that I actually got approved last year, and then weather just didn't quite work. And you just come up here, hit polygon, and then you got to keep your polygon out of the way, and then go to style and color, choose a color, get your opacity down a little bit so you'll be able to see where you're drawing. And then in this case, I don't know if you guys can see, there's a road here and a road up here. So this is the easiest burn unit I have on the whole ranch. There we go. And then all I have to do is come into here to measurements, bring it over to acres, and it's telling me it's 10.5. So I'd probably figure out a way to cut off a corner and something, keep it under 9, and have it be a, because it's easy to cut off corners, and actually corners can be pretty technical places to hold. So you can also get information through Google Earth on slope and so on and so forth. It can be really useful once you've actually created these units in Google Earth. And then what I do too is I actually put my basic prescription in the description, and that way I can share it with people really easily. And also I can access it from my phone if I forget what my prescription was on one of these burn units up here. But the easiest, that to me, as long as you know your land pretty well, is the easiest way to find acreage. Let me get back to that. It's funny sharing a screen, isn't it? So vegetation fuel load per acre. That's the one that really you're like, oh man, I'm gonna have to go do a bunch of fuel clipping and put it in an oven and dry it out and weigh it with a gram scale. This is a document that I'll send a link in the chat. This is what I use. And actually, I'm gonna just kind of move through these slides pretty fast. This is more technical than we really need to get. But I figured I put enough slides on here that you guys actually could probably not even find this document. But this is, it's pretty easy. So, you know, you're just looking at a picture and seeing how close that looks to your land. I like to take a picture that looks similar to the one that I'm justifying it with. This is how kind of cutesy this book really is. This is for forested areas. So trying to figure out how much downwoody debris you have, which is going to have a big effect on how much it smolders, which is going to be the biggest thing that air quality is worried about, is that smoldering factor for the fire. And then this is the chaparral. There's a whole sagebrush section, but this is their chaparral and grass section. Really just looking through some of these pictures and seeing what looks like your land. You know, here's 11. A lot of what I'm doing is 11 tons per acre, 18 tons per acre. You can see right at the bottom. That's the only number. That's the only number they're asking for that in there. And they're not asking that you go out there and clip all that vegetation and weigh it or something. So 19 tons per acre, you know, a lot of this looks like Mendocino County. This looks like a lot of Mendocino County here, 52 tons per acre. You know, you'll see it in a later note. You're not going to want to be doing really big burns like this, both for safety reasons, but also it might get you into a different classification of paperwork to deal with. You know, and sometimes if you do have this kind of really decadent fuel, this might be something that you want to get in touch with CAL FIRE with at some point, to do more of a vegetation management type plan situation. This is actually from they don't have any good pictures for if you want to do annual grass burning, in terms of estimating tons per acre. That's actually something that's not that hard to actually weigh your grass and get a really precise tons per acre, but air quality is happy with these photos, at least in my experience. So, you know, when we're doing these marsh grass burns, you know, we're up to 16, but yeah, kind of a wire grass, you know, you're kind of, I generally say like 5 tons an acre for grass. But if you kind of have degraded soil, it might be down to 2. Some ag fields. Anyway, you guys can go back and look through those slides and pause it if you don't want to try to look through that book. But so another, you know, the rest of this is about as simple as it gets. You know, I've worked with air quality, kind of the higher ups were trying to get Warren to tell me to do my burns 1 APN unit at a time, which I really am annoyed, as you guys noticed in my last one, about the idea that we're going to do things in nature based on property lines. It's just, I deal with that fencing a lot and it drives me crazy. You know, there's always a better way to do things. So, and I pushed back a little bit and Warren pushed back with me. And so I'd have multiple APNs on my smoke management plans, and that hasn't been a problem. Really basic stuff. I mean, it's not a complicated form. One thing that you kind of might surprise you to learn, expected fire intensity. You know, if you're burning chaparral, it's going to be high. If you're burning an understory mixed oak woodland fescue, it's going to be low. And actually, from an air quality perspective, they're plenty happy with a really intense burn, because it's going to help it kind of push through into a higher carrying elevation. So some of these, I don't know if you guys have ever been trying to like start a wood stove and it's really smoky getting into your house. I'll just light a crumpled up piece of newspaper and toss it in there. get a little more fire going to get the updraft started. Sort of the same principle that a really low intensity burn might actually smoke things out more than a higher intensity burn that's really able to get some lift to it. And then, the last thing you're gonna have to fill out on this is, could it have an impact on smoke sensitive areas? If your property is right next to a hospital, you should probably go try to volunteer for somebody else's property for a while. So that's going to be a pretty tough burn, I think, to get approved. And even, Lake County, we have to worry about getting inversion layers and smoking out some of the, retirement homes and so on and so forth in Lake County. And that really is, it's air quality's job to notice that, and it's air quality's job to point out if you didn't notice it. If it's really obvious, they'd probably be kind of annoyed if you came in and said, I'm right next to a school, but I didn't check this. But they're going to look at your plan, and they're going to see if they need to run that extra modeling that I showed in one of the first slides. And then the other one is if the burn is greater than 100 acres, you open up a much more kind of technical document that involves adding carrying heights to your prescriptions, which is going to make it harder to say you're in prescription. So, there's no reason not to go through that if it's really going to help you to have a burn greater than 100 acres. In terms of having that burn out by the evening before nighttime, which is another thing that they're going to want to see. If you open up yourself to that over 100 acres check mark, you're really going to open up a lot more paperwork. So I don't see a reason to, and that's why I have 350 acres right now that I want to burn, but I have it in smaller pieces. And they'll even accept, I want to burn 50%, 30% of unit. I have it right here. How do these units work? Of unit like 20-4D, I can burn, a section of that rather than the whole thing. So I divided mine into more pieces than probably was necessary, and that increased my cost. But it also, I think it's $110 now, if I remember correctly, which is really reasonable. Humboldt is in the thousand plus, I think 1,400 maybe. So you don't have to do as many kind of subdivisions as I did in terms of your units, but it does make it kind of easy for my smoke management to correlate to my prescriptions. Because as Norm noted, as you get into multiple topographies and vegetation types, your complexity of your burn plan really increases. So I doing it, mostly just a couple people, I tend to keep these burns to at least these plans to maybe 60 acres at the most. So yeah, there's that V-Smoke GIS prediction software. When you really talk to these scientists, they all laugh at their own modeling software, because a lot of this vegetation data is from like an ocular cross section that somebody walked in like 1886. So there you go. One more slide. I always like to end on a pretty slide, but really those few things are noted are the only thing harder than filling out your name on that whole smoke management process. So really don't be intimidated by it. There's no reason not to do sub 9 acre burns. I'd love to see my mosaic be sub 9 acres. At some point, you're going to find, that it would not be safe to light from the middle of a big chaparral patch, and you're going to want to burn a bigger unit, in which case you're going to get air quality involved. They now have, that was the other thing I was going to show. They just launched this online request to burn. It's basically your same as your smoke management plan. I'm just kind of scrolling through it, but it's all kind of day of. So yeah, send the burn request. I would still call Warren because I like the guy, but he texted me that that link for my last one, so I know that they would prefer that we move to that, even if we call as well. I would certainly call if I didn't hear back from them right away. So, once again, don't be intimidated by this little piece of paperwork. It sounds like a plan that you're going to somehow sort of manage the smoke, but really it's just about when you're going to do it and what's the overall meteorological conditions that are going to determine whether or not it affects the people that we don't want to be, getting too much smoke around them. That's what I got.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. There's just a question, and so just to remind everyone that each county and each air quality management district, for example, Sonoma has 2, is going to have a different plan, a different process. But Kyle, can you specifically mention the cost, like what it costs to build a smoke management plan, how long it's good for in Mendocino County?
I think it's $110. Norm said 100, but
Yeah.
I remember it being 110. It's good for 5 years. And then you need a burn permit to go with each one of those smoke management plans. So that's another, and that's another 17, I think. I kind of feel like it increased this year, 19 this year.
Oh, they went up $2. Okay.
Went up $2. So, and that's the disadvantage. You could also create a more complex burn plan and a more complex smoke management plan and get away with a bigger smoke management plan, save a little money on how many smoke management plans you have, but also increase the complexity of your burn plan and also possibly increase the probability that they're going to say no. That's the other thing that, to me, the advantages of having multiples so that I can say, let me do this 25-acre one. I just, my perception is that I'm going to have a better chance of them saying yes on a given day based on conditions than if I said, hey, I want to do my, 400-acre burn. So.
Yeah, that was great, guys. I know, so out of respect for everyone, we are at the official end time. I don't know if Kyle and Norm, you have a couple more minutes to answer a few more questions. But as we've said multiple times, don't get overwhelmed by these plans. They can be as simple or as complicated as you want them to be. Start simple, work your way up. Participate in PBA burns or community burns and learn from those landowners and the professionals who have been doing this for a long time. And kind of get your feet wet, so to speak, from that process until you become more comfortable and you can start tackling these processes. And also, we can consider follow up more technical workshops. If folks are having particular issues or questions, we can try to dig into those as a community and answer some of those questions. One question is, your fuel, the Scott and sorry, my computer froze for a second. Your fuel type guidebook, is there any way you can post the link or at least show people where they can look for that? And this is a question for you too, Norm. How many of the different eco types in the regions in California, or do all of our regions, do we use one model? What about, we have some folks from the Sierras, so like Nevada County, more eastern side of the state. How many robust fuel type models are there out there? And I would imagine the Forest Service has quite a few of them. So it's a matter of just digging around for those resources. But, what do you guys, is it robust? Is it something that people are going to have to hunt for, or is it readily available?
I think it's fairly readily available right now, Mike. And I know the original, I'm trying to think of my old classes, there might've been 20 fuel models or something like that. And now I believe it's tenfold from that now that they've identified, and rightfully so, because they all burn differently. So, but it should be pretty available on the internet.
Yeah, I think you could just search it, like Forest Service, fuel model types, and then your region, and there's going to be tons and tons of resources that come up with information. So it's something that's available out there. You're just going to have to do a little searching for it. Kyle posted his. Well, there's a lot of discussion. Some of the we have a template California burn plan on the Cal PBA website. I posted that link. There's also an example of a burn land for grasslands there. I think we could probably work as a group and maybe share some examples of burn plans and smoke management plans as we get more burns under our belts at this point. One question was about Norm. This is for both of you, but there's a question that maybe we can briefly mention is, can you burn once the CAL FIRE implements the burn ban? So once they have the fire season starts, are you allowed to burn at that point?
Good question. I actually wrote that one down also. My experience and whatnot is yes and no. You can burn. If you were to put together a little plan stating why, it could be an invasive species type of a burn, you need to do an agricultural exemption. Yes, it is, you are capable to burn, but you need to work closely with your CAL FIRE unit and the folks there to get those approvals, make sure the weather systems and all that, but it's doable, but it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, it definitely requires communication with CAL FIRE. There's also additional permits that are required. So CAL FIRE will require, if they are supportive, they will require additional permits through CAL FIRE that they will, basically it bolsters your efforts to make sure you're extra safe because you're in a fire season.
And that also, I don't know about we had a previous ag commissioner that was supportive of it, but it would also depend on the interest of the ag commissioner in helping you get that exemption. And I don't know about our current guy. I haven't tried.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, we've been posting links in here. Kyle posted his field guide for fuel loading models. We posted the link to the Mendocino County Air Quality Management District smoke management plan. What was that other guide? A smoke management guide for prescribed and wildland fire. Kyle posted that link. And I know this was a lot. We tried, it's just an introduction. So, we're trying, I know it might be a little overwhelming, but we're trying to get you to start thinking about this process and introduce some of these resources. I'm just trying to think if there's any quick questions that we can go over. There's a lot of questions about using burn bosses, and I think that's like a whole nother topic, but Norm, can you just briefly talk about, how that relationship works? Like if you want to use a burn boss, really kind of what happens, because people are asking, hey, how do we contact one? And well, Norm, there's only a few of them, but we're trying to build that capacity. So if you could kind of talk about that process, that would be really nice.
Yeah, I was looking at some of those myself. I think, and I haven't really searched it all that much, but I know of two in the North State right now. One, and I've seen it pop up here, Phil Diet, Prometheus Fire. Dealt with him a little bit in some classes, really nice guy, does quite a bit down there. He's out of the Bay Area, I think. And then there's another burn boss out of Redding. One of the things is get your checkbook out. It's not cheap. It'd be nice to be able to cover some of these costs with grant monies or something, but it's not cheap. I was actually going to call the one from Redding and see if they wouldn't give me a little estimate to do some burning, just kind of get an idea of the cost so I can pass that on to some folks. And then the whole new burn boss curriculum that's coming up, that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, I think that might be a whole other conversation, but what Norm's hinting at is that my colleagues are developing a California certified burn boss program so that folks like Norm and Kyle and other landowners who are essentially very practiced and experienced prescribed fire users can get certified as a burn boss and have those qualifications to help other landowners with, contracting out their services and their time to help other landowners. And also, we're working on the insurance pool to have the option of having liability insurance to help those burn bosses as well. So that's something that, look forward to developing in the prescribed burn world. I think there's lots of great conversation going on, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Do you have any last minute thoughts you guys want to share real quick? I think, if not, I'm going to we'll wrap it up. I really appreciate you guys again putting those talks together. It was really informative and really helpful. There was some interest in maybe summarizing those into like a fact sheet. So maybe I'll talk to you guys about possibly, making a resource for people for the workshop. But do you guys have any final thoughts you want to share? Norm or Kyle?
I'm good right now, but I do wish we were doing this in a classroom setting where we can actually see people and answer questions and talk after class and at lunch and all that kind of stuff, because you really pass on some information that way. But
Yeah.
anyway, I think one of the biggest keys is to look at.
Well, Norm, I think you muted yourself in the middle of your sentence.
All right, I was just saying, keep it simple. We might not need to do a complex burn plan and need to hire burn bosses and all that kind of stuff. So that's it.
Yeah. Somebody was asking like, hey, this is a big burn and this process is overwhelming. I was like, we'll start pile burning. Pile burning is pretty easy. What's bigger than it? I was like, well, go build a half-acre or a quarter-acre burn unit in your grassland and burn it and see what happens. Like, it doesn't have to be super complicated. You can start really small and cut your teeth on this process. Kyle, anything? You good?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of reiterate what you just said about, you know, whether it's pile burning, then letting it creep away from the pile a little bit before you put it out, monitoring it. I mean, I feel like, I was thinking about when Norm was talking about being in class. I took a class with Hugh Safford a few years ago, who's the regional ecologist for the Forest Service. And he just scrounging around outside of Hopland Field Station for a little, showing us how redwood needles burn a little bit differently than Doug fir needles. So there's no scale at which you can't learn something about fire. It is a complex organism, and as it scales, it has cumulative effects that are beyond some of its parts, which is an important thing to remember, that it is extremely unpredictable at scale. But whether it's being at the campfire and tossing a little, wet or dry grass and getting a feeling for how that burns, or just on a really, really low risk day, just seeing how things burn a little bit. You're always kind of creating that patterning instinct that allows you to predict a little bit what's going to happen next, which is what somebody like Norm has developed over the years, is an incredible patterning capacity to understand that the complexity of the fire behavior, and that starts just around the campfire.
Yeah, well said. All right. Thank you, everybody, again. Thank you to our presenters, Kyle and Norm. Appreciate your guys volunteering your time to help share your knowledge with other people. Thank you to all participants. Again, I'll remind you that I will, this recording will be available to y'all. I'll post it on that same playlist in that YouTube. Remember, these videos are only available to you guys, so be careful who you share that link with. And next week, we'll be talking about another very robust set of topics, establishing burn units and actually putting fire on the ground. So it's going to be a lot of material again. But remember, this is an introduction. We're trying to get you your brain starting to crank and the juices flowing for you to think about using prescribed fire on your own. So it was a great conversation, great input from the group. And as always, I enjoyed it, and I will see you all next week. So have a great night.